Yeah, and so that's I'm taking some notes here, thinking about discussions I've had with Alan Kay, who you know as well. I think that he always said perspective is worth 80 IQ points. But if we have and I was on the board of trustees of a college once where I looked around the room and I said, "Hey, we're missing IQ points," because I'm looking around, I'm seeing a lot of people that look like me and look like a bunch of other people here. We don't have enough of a diversity of experience, and diversity has become a bad word, but in the
I was
Alan
just about to tease
sense
you
of
about
it, yeah, I mean, if we do homogenize our perspective and we don't have all these radically different perspectives that give us different insights, then we do lose something about how we process reality, how we process the world, how we solve problems. So I think that's one disruption that I think is going to be critical. The other thing you just talked about is goals. And when my very first exposure to true machine learning was at Microsoft working on the Connect project with Alex Kipman, Jaron Lanier was there, my colleague David Smith. Um, and I learned that how important that setting, the new way to solve problems is not writing algorithms. It was defining what the goals were and then dumping in a massive set of data and letting
yeah.
it infer its own path. But you've got to be really careful about those. It's like aligning incentives for education or healthcare or political systems. If you don't put a lot of thought into that, you get bad outcomes. And at the singularity conferences, we talked about the paperclip problem.
I
Like
was just
you
going to
have
say the
systems
problem,
that
or
say
like you said before, losing at a game of chess. Whatever you tell it to do, you have to be very careful about.
exactly because that's what it will do. And the thing we're talking about today with Ben Goertzel and others about artificial general intelligence or super intelligence, whatever you call it, is the possibility or probability that it starts creating its own utility functions and its own goals. And may those goals might evolve to be something that's very alien to what we're trying to accomplish. Has nothing to do with us, in fact, and what happens then. But sorry, getting back to disruption of thought. You know, we're trying to solve some really existential problems in how we govern ourselves with looking at things like climate change, how we apply science to both medicine and the climate and other things. And I am worried about this disruption, the fact that we're leaning too heavily on these, and let's just acknowledge the fact that these large language models, especially, are lossy systems by definition. Whatever you dump into it, the output is less than what it was provided originally. And we run the risk of having what we call model collapse, which is it keeps training on its own output. And especially if there's hallucinations in there, you end up losing track of what's real and what's true, but also lose the perspective of how we actually solve problems. So I don't know. I should form that in the form of a question, I suppose, but
No, no, you, you've
think
you've
about where we're headed.
you've teed it up perfectly. You talked about narrative campaigns before, and I'm doing some work on a national security basis around the cognitive domain, and more to follow about that. But my basic premise is the NATO's chief scientist said cognitive domain is the most important domain of the future battlefield. But every single person looking at it is looking at through the lens of bad actors.
Mm,
I look at it through the inherent aspects of the system. Uh, a lot of my colleagues, including you, talk a lot about AI. Because that's attended to, I don't focus on AI. I'm very aware and I'm very participating in it, but I let folks like you handle it. I talk about Netflix and the microwave oven. Now, bear with me. What we do when we sit down to watch Netflix, Barry McLuhan, shapes us. It shapes our physiology. If we watch zombie movies or movies that show crime, we have a negative perception of how dangerous and stressful the world is, and we physiologically stress ourselves out. That'll affect us the next day. We can choose not to not watch Netflix, but to either be aware of that. Your watch, your technology says, "Hey, dude, heart rate and stress are up." Oh, maybe I'll switch over to the BBC and watch Escape to the Countryside, or watch the new version of Simulation Century podcast. And think my mind. The microwave oven gives you 15 minutes back in the day. What do you choose to do with it? So as you talked about, I talk about catastrophe fatigue. My second book looks at the fact that technology leaves us better off objectively, but feeling worse off subjectively. And I go through 15 different demographics, from whites without college degrees, through affluent teens, through et cetera, et cetera. The saddest group that I found, other than indigenous people who are not objectively better off, is the youth. And in part because of the media that they consume is an echo chamber of negativity. They bias to the artificial story of Lord of the Flies without searching out the true story of Lord of the Flies. But let's face it, they've inherited a whole bunch of crap from us. So they have to figure out how to solve this. And people get they want to tune out. They don't want to read my book. It's too depressing. It's too much hard work. But the funny thing is in my head, once you read my book, it takes about 10 hours, you can start living your own life better each day, because you can start to be aware of these things. Maybe you turn the Netflix channel. Maybe you feel a little less concerned about solving the world's problems and just leading a better life. Now, if we can do that collectively, we can shift markets. And I think that that's an important thing to understand, is that these aren't some big, impossible things that a 20-year-old can't make a dent on. The 20-year-old is in a ecosystem that is working against them, not because of economic interests or government interests or lack of government controls, but just because of the pacing problem. In multiple industries, we have this thing we call the pacing problems. AI is one of them. But biology doesn't evolve very fast. Culture evolves. Technology evolves very fast. But when you evolve culture, and I don't want to get political here, but January 6th was a pacing problem. Culture evolved too fast for people who felt it was coming at their cost, among other things. So while cultural evolution unlocks new rights for blacks, women, lesbians, and gays, that comes at a change to somebody else's culture. So biology can only evolve so fast. Culture has to be very careful about how fast it can evolve. But technology, and I'll stop here, evolves faster than anybody realizes. So singularity, Kurzweilian's second half of the chessboard, we all talk about Moore's law, and then maybe people like us will debate with David Bray about whether Moore's law is continuing or not. But it's not just Moore's law. Moore's law is interacting with lots of other laws about Metcalfe's, etc. That's within digital technology. Then you unpack that and you look at the broader sense of technology in our world. So the idea that IQ points have gone up 30 points in the last 100 years is attributed to improvements in nutrition, in
That's
food.
the Flynn effect, right?
And education. Yeah. So the Flynn effect is unpacked as a series of technological advances in a lot of different fields. So what I say is happening is technology is evolving much faster than Moore's law. It's not exponential. It's algorithmic in the sense that it's many different elements all evolving exponentially. And then when you have improvements in AI, which have improvements in material science, which have improvements in superconducting materials, which then create new forms of metaverses, which then the feedback loops here are so bootstrapping that it's moving much faster than anybody that I know articulates. And that's part of the pacing problem here is we think we have time to deal with this. We don't. And we need to consciously navigate this.
And I know in my podcast I've talked about this before, but I'll repeat it here because it's appropriate just for context. In the Industrial Revolution, we had the same issue of disruption, but it was in like 1800, 91% of everybody in the United States was involved in agriculture. In 1900, it was 41 or 40. Today, it's 2. So we had 200 years for people to adjust to this technological disruption. The problem with accelerating technology today, the minute we started putting things into silicon, is that we're seeing we have like maybe 10 years, or some people. I talked to Ben Gertzel just like 2 months ago, and he's like, no, it's going to be next year. Like next year, we're going to see,
Yeah.
and I know everybody on this in this audience, we've talked about the singularity many times. That was Werner Vinge, the science fiction writer out of San Diego, originally said we're going to have a point where AI starts improving itself, and at that point, it's not that it's doom and gloom, or it might be P doom, it might be something else, but it's just we can't predict what the world's going to look like afterwards, and that's very disruptive to governing bodies, to sociological institutions, because like you said, we're not able to evolve at that pace. We humans still have, I think it's 200 hertz is the synapse speed.
Yeah.
Um, and that hasn't changed since the Pleistocene. So we're having to deal with this technology advancing, and that's going to create disruption. That's why we need smarter governance more than ever. And we need people like the people-centered internet and others who are trying to steer it and create utility functions toward more benevolent outcomes. I had one other thought that, I did want to talk about, and I know you and we didn't really argue, but we were talking about Michael Pollan's book, A World Appears, talking about his, he is talking about consciousness, and that's very different from what you're talking about with thought, right? But one of the things that I put together that I don't think AI did pick up was his discussion of homeostasis and equilibrium. So, I was talking to my 14-year-old son the other day about just, lower forms of AI, higher forms of AI. But a lower form, I just showed him the thermostat. The thermostat is sensing the world, and it's trying to achieve whatever I said is the equilibrium point. If I say it's 72, it's 74 here now because it's hot. It will sense the environment and then take an action trying to get back to that sort of equilibrium point. And that is a low form of AI, and you could argue it's a form of consciousness, or Poland was. Um, but in your book, I think you made a statement, and I might be remembering it wrong. You said, look, because of the disruption of thought, it's impossible to achieve equilibrium anymore. And that's what's creating a lot of dissatisfaction. So I might be remembering it wrong, as this is just off the cuff, but can you talk about that equilibrium bit?
Yeah. Well, and then the next piece of that is, so what? What would we do about it? I mean, if I was right, I think you articulated it better than I did. The industry term for the reallocation of people from one industry to another is reabsorption. In 200 years, and actually, I think we accomplished it in maybe 80 years from the agriculture into industry, and then subsequently industry into service economy, and now into what? That's an easier way to understand it. But the what is it? Hagel, Brown, and is it Steele? I forget the third author. Did a paper that articulated this. This is the former chief scientist for what is it? Xerox Park. Anyways, top technology thinkers said that we're in a new place where we had a chance to deal with the repercussions of the telegraph, of the steam engine, of the railroad, and frankly, even TV and newer technologies. However, we're now entering a world in which there's no opportunity to recover back to some stasis point. So we're always going to arrive at some future point. And I think this has huge implications culturally, right? So we have to begin going back to your Appalachian music, recognizing we're going to lose things here. We're going to lose a lot. Let's
Mm.
just make conscious and informed decisions about it, and try and make them in ways that try and make people whole who lose things. So the I absolutely believe, particularly because I think technology is moving faster than anybody gives it credit for, and deeper and more pervasively. A innovation by a 17-year-old in Wollongong can go around the world in, you know, a couple of hours, right? And obviously, we saw how fast ChatGPT went around the world. So with technology moving so fast, the idea of Hans Selye in studying physiology has eustress and distress. The idea that there's good stress and bad stress, and good stress stresses you. And the word we use a lot these days is resilience, right? But
In gaming, we call it intensity curves.
yeah,
Anyway,
so,
another.
and as a former athlete, we used to have downtime to recover from the stresses applied the day before.
Mhm.
So I think it's obvious that we shouldn't try to get back to something. In education, in employment, we're moving forward, and we're moving forward to places that aren't going to become stable. So, what are going to be the consequences of this? A solid percentage of the people that are experiencing this, and it's global, and it applies to almost everybody. The percentage is going to be disoriented, and disoriented people tend to become lonely and fragmented and attend to echo chambers. This is where I have national security implications of, the road to totalitarianism, Hannah Arendt, that this is completely foreseeable. A
Mhm.
certain percentage of the people are embracing this change, either because they're not just necessarily elites taking advantage of it and scooping the cream of it off, but they were disadvantaged under the old system. So you'll have disadvantaged, you'll have advantaged, and then of course you'll have a huge group of people in the middle. I love your idea of using technology to help all three of these. And when people say, "Well, you can't use technology," that's the problem. The example I use is you're at a train platform. If you're a European, if you're an American, you don't understand this analogy at all. You're on a train platform, the train is leaving, and you're running to catch it. However, it's speeding up faster than you're speeding up. What do you do? And if it's going so much faster than even I think it is, you grab another technology, a bike, jump on the bike, pedal, and catch the train. The idea that we can use and help people to learn to use technology to navigate all of this. The smartwatch isn't necessarily something available to everybody, but if that core of group at the bottom is feeling like the world is going to hell, their life is full of fear and whatever, if they can be informed accurately that, yeah, there's bad things, and yes, there's bad things in your life, but there's choices you can make that can help you to disorient. um,
Yeah.
Propaganda to those people, it sounds like I'm peddling down to them, but it's the best I can come up with as a consequence of what you described.
No, the hopeful thing that I know we've talked about in people-centered internet groups there is that we hope that it's going to be more like we're not going to leave people behind because it's impossible for them to catch up with the example you just gave. It'll be more like Africa. You talked to Linda Bernard, our COO, earlier. She grew up in Malawi, Africa, right? And she has that direct experience of, here the early offices, we were wiring everything together. We were running cable in, even our internet was all Ethernet cable and little outlets in every room. Whereas in Africa, they leapt over all of that and adopted the next generation of technology where everything is wireless, everything's Wi-Fi, and they didn't have to build all that horrible infrastructure. And
Yeah.
that was a in other words, they benefited from leaping over all the painful intermediary technologies. We hope that that's going to be the case with technologies like AI and some of the other things, robotics and CRISPR and all these capabilities that we're beginning to wield. And I do hope that that's the case. Um, I want to go back to I watched your TEDx talk, and you were talking about, what we started off this conversation with about exocortical extensions, how we humans, don't know how to spell, but we produce perfectly spelled documents now. We don't know where anything is, but we never get lost. We have cars who park themselves now, that kind of thing. So it really does raise that. I have my little Wally um, robotic thing behind me here earlier, talking to someone else about that scene in Wally where everyone was just amusing themselves all the time and being
Floating
floated around
around
in
and,
these
yeah,
chairs and
drinking
overweight
their.
and because technology does everything for you. That's the most dystopian view I can see. Whereas I'm hoping that it'll be something more like Cory Doctorow's Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, where we're all actually evolving to spend our human intelligence and capability on something more powerful, like better art, better theater, better new and novel hypotheses in science where we can bring technology to bear on it. But what do you think? Um, if there's so many things that technology can are beginning to do better than humans can do, what do you think we should be doing with the powers of thought that we have going forward?
Yeah. First of all, I'm not a futurist. I think everybody at that game pretty much sucks.
I say I'm a nowist as well. Like I tried to be a futurist early on, but then now I'm a nowist because it's all
Yeah,
cut.
I'm an applied nowist. That's what I would say. So that brings me back to Gibson, right? Gibson's the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So if you can envision a world um, as a futurist and you look around and you realize nobody's doing it, you have a specific set of jobs to instantiate it. But if you can look around and see pockets of people starting to do it, then your question becomes how do you scale it? So there's two different problems. I'm focused on the second, and I would say, well, what is out there that represents this? Let me start first with my own career. Um, I don't do fantasy football. I have no followers on Instagram. I drive a 10-year-old truck. By all accounts, I live a middling life. I'm the happiest person I know because I chose 10 or 13 years ago to pursue the eudaimonic happiness of connecting to others. By the way, my second book provides a scorecard of human flourishing because, what are we going to do? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, income, lifespan. No one of these works across all populations. I came down with self-determination theory, which has three pillars: connectedness to others, a sense of personal progress, and being part of something bigger than oneself. So the idea that you have agency, that you're connected to others, you sense it doesn't. You don't necessarily have to be making progress, but you have to perceive that you are. And in fact, you can be making progress and not perceive it and be worse off. So under this scorecard, I'm doing great. I have conversations with you, 4 or 5 other global ecosystems, great conversations with friends, but about things that are not about me. It's about stuff that are bigger than me.
Ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, and even solutions. Actually making a difference. So I think that if more people can be allowed, informed and allowed, I always think about the table of contents, right? Here's what's in the thing, right? We don't have that out there. We don't have technology. I think of the world needing a personal operating system where there's a dashboard that surfaces to us. We go in there with our values and we say, you know what? Friday, hedonism. Saturday, relaxation. And then the body studies us, studies the world around us like your thermostat, and then provides us some guidance, right? Technology will help us get there, but we're not there yet. So what can we do in the meantime if we don't want to become, Pat? Well, this is where Jim Rutt held a big candle for me. He has this idea. He did have this idea called Game B. He describes the construct that we operate in within America, in particular. I think that the materialistic, competitive, hedonistic treadmill and me-centered construct of America, particularly, is working against us. I think we need to be allowed, not necessarily
I'm
become.
thinking about Bhutan as you're describing this, right?
Well, yeah,
They have their happiness
the
index.
national happiness thing,
I think it's fantastic.
but but it doesn't have to be so idealistic, and it doesn't have to be the '60s hippie. It doesn't have to be a back to the land. It just has to be letting go of the pursuit of the rat race. And so Jim Rutt and a number of others have put a lot of work into, for several years, this idea of Game B. What would a different social construct look like? And then he has Transition B. How would we get from Game A to Game B? And he has ecosystems all over the world where people are beginning to trial this. So if the future is going to be different, and I think it needs to be. What are the things that we need to let go of? And we need to let go of the fact that I put a clean, fancy shirt on for this call because I wanted to look respectable. My ideas should be the thing that matters, not my
Mm.
Audi or this or my Instagram followers. So finding meaning, connecting to others, working on things that are bigger than oneself, letting go of the things that we traditionally want. Listen, I'll watch a sitcom for like 5 minutes, and the single mother police officer comes into a house where she's got 4 kids, and each of them have bigger bedrooms than I have in $1 million home. It provides an unrealistic view to people about how everybody else is living. So just
It's
becoming
that
aware.
what's the phrase? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question, but we need a different way forward. We need to let where we're going now isn't working out so well for us. We can be forgiven, though. This is all new, but we have to become resilient. And if we build a bridge to the future, I use this in my NATO talk, we we can't just get to the future. We have to build a bridge for others to follow us.
I like that. And I think, as you and I discussed earlier this week, with the passing of a few friends of ours like Mark Prensky and others, just that pressing obligation that you and I have this lived experience, and everybody has their own. And I do believe perspective is worth 80 IQ points, but that obligation of sharing that and having conversations like this and communing. So I think the way you wrap this up is perfect, because that's exactly why I do this. I'm not, yes, I'm going to promote my book to whatever end that achieves, but my company, I'm still sort of tilting at a variety of windmills, just like you are. But in the end, this is very satisfying to talk with very intelligent people about things they care about, and doing what we can to dignify what's left of the days we have on this planet. So Pat, thanks for joining me on this episode of Simulation Century. I have a feeling this is going to be one of the more indelible ones as we talk about technology and disruption, and how do we achieve sort of autotelic flow, if you want to call it that, in the flow of all this technology. And I'll just say that I have my next Simulation Century event. I've been doing this for the last 14 years for Joint Forces Command. It's been in the Bay Area, the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area until now. This year, it's going to be in Arlington, Virginia. The next one is August 18th there. So check that out at the Mod SimWorld website, which you'll see in the credits here. And once again, Pat, thanks for joining me for this, and continuing this great conversation we have around all these technologies and the disruption of thought. And go buy his book when it comes out.
Well, have your institution buy the book. It's priced fairly high at the beginning, but thank you so much for having me. I think this is important work. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.